I still remember the first time I saw him. Elias, the quiet logistics guy at my old company. Back then, I was drowning in deadlines, pressure from above, and the kind of corporate rot that seeps into your bones if you're not careful. Elias happened to be the unlucky soul who reported to me on a project that was already doomed. And I treated him badly. Not yelling, not throwing things around the office badly, no, the worst kind. The quiet, calculated contempt that corporate culture sometimes teaches you. I dismissed his concerns. I lied straight to his face about decisions I'd made and blamed him for setbacks that weren't his fault. I painted him as the problem because back then, it was easier than admitting the truth, I was in way over my head. He quit not long after. Walked out with his little cardboard box, eyes down, not even giving me the satisfaction, or the guilt, of meeting my gaze. And I honestly thought that would be the end of it. People come and go in business all the time. Bridges burn, and the world keeps spinning. But fate, as I would learn years later, has a wicked sense of humor. Years rolled by after Elias left, quietly, cleanly, like he was removing a splinter from his life. Meanwhile, I climbed the ladder. New title. New salary. New office. Same industry, different company. And honestly, I'd forgotten him. Not out of cruelty, out of sheer corporate amnesia. Faces blur when you're sprinting from quarter to quarter. Then one Tuesday morning, my director walked into my office with that kind of grin executives get when they smell money. Got a potential new partner, he said, tossing a thick folder onto my desk. Innovis Logistics. Small but scaling. Their CEO wants a meeting. Thought you'd review their portfolio before we sign anything. Innovis. A name that tickled something in the back of my mind. I flipped open the folder, and there he was. Elias. Now listed as Chief Operations Officer. My stomach dropped through the floor. It's one thing to mistreat someone. It's another to find out they survived it, thrived, and built something real. I stared at his photo longer than I should have, older, sharper, confident. The kind of person people listen to now. That's when it hit me, he probably had no idea that I was here. That I would see this. That our companies might work side by side again. The universe had placed a loaded gun on the table. And for the first time in years, I wondered whether I deserved to pick it up. I didn't sleep that night. I kept picturing Elias the way he used to stand in my doorway, file in hand, voice careful, like he was tiptoeing around a landmine. And me? I was the landmine. I dismissed him, contradicted him, fed him blatant lies about upper management decisions, just so I didn't have to own my own failures. Now the man I had lied to was sitting at the top of a company my director was drooling to work with. Life really does love symmetry. The meeting with my director was the next morning, early. He wanted my evaluation of Innovis before he scheduled his handshake and smile session with Elias and the CEO. I walked into his office knowing I couldn't pretend neutrality. Not this time. So, he said, what do you think? He leaned back in his leather chair like someone ready to hear good news. I took a breath. A long one. Before anything moves forward, I said, you need to know something about them, and about me. His eyebrows shot up. Directors hate surprises. But I told him anyway. Everything. How I'd treated Elias. How I'd lied to him. How the fallout wasn't his fault, it was mine. How the man he was now only existed because he walked away from the mess I helped create. My director stared at me, arms crossed, expression unreadable. You're telling me this, why? He finally asked. Because you deserve the truth before tying our company to someone who might think we're cut from the same cloth as the people who mistreated him, I said. He deserves better than to be blindsided. And we deserve the consequences of the truth. There was a long pause. Then he said something I didn't expect. Thank you for telling me. I walked out of that office feeling like I just confessed to a crime. In a way, I had. The wheels of revenge, his or fate's, had just begun to turn. My director didn't call me back into his office for the rest of the day. No follow-up questions. No clarifications. Just silence, corporate, suffocating silence. It wasn't until the next morning that he appeared at my door again, leaning against the frame like a man who'd slept on a decision the whole night. Close the door, he said. Never a comforting sentence. I did. He sat down across from me, folded his hands, and exhaled slowly. I thought about what you told me, he said. And I made some calls. My stomach tightened. That could mean anything, from rescinding the partnership to firing me on the spot for opening my big, morally awakened mouth. But then he continued. I called a few of our long-term partners. Some of them have worked with Innovis before. He leaned back. Let's just say, the picture we had isn't the picture we needed. He didn't go into details, but the meaning was clear. Elias wasn't the only thing from the past catching up with Innovis. We're not moving forward, he said flatly. Not with them. Not now. Maybe not ever. It hit me like cold water. Not because the deal was dead, my director pulled deals off life support all the time, but because he'd actually listened. He'd taken my confession seriously enough to start digging. And what he found? Bad enough that he told the CEO personally that Innovis would never touch one of our contracts. But here's the part that still surprises me. They asked why, he said. I told them the truth. Every word of it. My lies. My treatment of Elias. The way the old company culture rotted from the inside out. The director didn't sanitize it, didn't spin it. He told Innovis exactly why they were being shut out. He stood up, smoothed his tie, and ended the conversation with, we don't partner with companies built on the backs of people who were mistreated. Not anymore. And just like that, a multi-million-dollar pipeline evaporated for them. But what really twists the knife? They still had no idea that Elias was the reason their name was now quietly sliding onto every internal blacklist in our network. And that the truth, my truth, had finally cashed a debt years overdue. When Innovis got the news, delivered straight from my director, they reacted exactly how every overconfident mid-tier company reacts when told no by someone bigger. Shock. Confusion. A hint of indignation. But no self-reflection. Never that. I wasn't in the room for their reaction, of course, but I got the play-by-play from my director later. Apparently, when he told them we wouldn't be moving forward, and why, they froze. Completely blindsided. What are you talking about? Their CEO reportedly asked. We've never mistreated anyone. We run an ethical operation. My director, bless him, didn't argue. He simply told them the decision was final and wished them luck moving forward. But here's where things get delicious. Our company isn't isolated, we're a cornerstone in a massive chain of commercial partnerships. When we blacklist someone, every company in our network pays attention. They assume there's something rotten behind the curtain. They start pulling out of talks. Removing names from consideration. Redirecting contracts elsewhere. Within 2 weeks, Innovis went from promising rising competitor to quietly avoided. Contracts dried up. Proposals were suddenly no longer aligned with corporate strategy. Meetings got cancelled. Their inbox filled with polite rejections that all sounded like carbon copies of each other. Millions, literally millions, in projected business evaporated. And the best part? Elias had no clue. He probably thought it was market fluctuation, bad timing, a streak of unfortunate luck. Not once did the possibility cross his mind that I had anything to do with it. Why would it? Last he saw me, I was a smug, stressed middle manager with too much power and too little humility. But karma? Karma remembers what people forget. And fate had finally given me a chance to fix the one thing I'd never been able to undo. About a month after Innovis started taking losses, the industry news sites finally picked up the scent. A dry little headline appeared on a subscription-only logistics bulletin. Innovis, rapid expansion slows after unspecified partnership withdrawals. Translated from corporate speak. They're bleeding, but no one will say why. And honestly, that's exactly how I wanted it. Meanwhile, I kept an eye on Elias, but from a distance. Not out of guilt. Not out of pride. Out of something much stranger, curiosity. Because the man I had known years ago, the quiet, patient, defeated employee I steamrolled, was now giving interviews, shaking hands at conferences, speaking on panels about operational transformation and resilience. He looked confident. Self-assured. A version of himself he might never have reached if he'd stayed under people like me. Watching him was like watching someone you once shoved into a puddle now walk on stage to receive an award, clean suit, no mud in sight. But the shadow trailing behind him? He didn't see that. He didn't see Innovis's board scrambling. Didn't see the internal memos circulating about unexpected contract attrition. Didn't see the projection charts being quietly adjusted downward quarter after quarter. And the cruelest twist? He blamed himself. At least, that's what the industry gossip suggested. He thought their failures were growing pains, signs that the company wasn't ready to scale as fast as they had hoped. He was taking the weight of the downturn onto his own shoulders, trying to fix things that weren't broken, trying to solve problems that weren't even his fault. He was fighting a battle he didn't know I had already won for him. A battle he didn't even realize had started. And the irony of it all? The man I once treated without an ounce of dignity was now unknowingly dismantling the empire that had risen from the ashes of his own mistreatment. Not out of vengeance. Not out of malice. Simply because truth, once spoken, spreads like a crack through the foundation of anything built on lies. If you've spent enough years in the corporate world, you know this truth. Formal decisions move slowly, but informal whispers travel at the speed of light. And once my director blacklisted Innovis, the Whisper Network did exactly what Whisper Networks do, spread the message without ever stating it out loud. It started small. A procurement manager at a sister company asked ours, "Hey, you guys still considering Innovis?" The response was a simple, loaded. We decided against it. No explanation. No details. Corporate kryptonite. That same procurement manager mentioned it to another partner during a site visit. Who mentioned it to a consultant? Who mentioned it in a just between us conversation during a conference dinner? By week 6, Innovis wasn't officially blacklisted anywhere. But the message had spread everywhere. Don't touch them. No one wanted to be the company that partnered with a pariah, especially when no one knew exactly what Innovis had done wrong. The lack of clarity made it worse. Humans fear the unknown. Corporations fear it even more. And slowly, the industry began quietly closing its doors. Projects stalled. Inquiries dropped off. Even vendors raised prices on them, as if they sensed weakness in the water. What made it truly poetic was this. Every executive at Innovis kept trying to solve a problem they couldn't identify. They held meeting after meeting, trying to trace the rot. But how do you find smoke when the fire was a single conversation held in an office they'd never stepped foot in? Meanwhile, I kept my distance. My hands were clean now, at least publicly. I hadn't sabotaged them. Hadn't slandered anyone. I had simply told the truth. A truth that echoed through an entire industry like a dropped coin in a cathedral. They were collapsing under the weight of consequences they still didn't know they'd earned. And the most quietly satisfying part? Elias, my former employee who once stood there as I lied to his face, was unknowingly steering the company as the ground gave way beneath it. He wasn't the cause. But he would one day be the one left standing in the rubble, wondering where the first crack began. It took a couple more months before the first real fracture appeared. Not in their contracts, not in their finances, but in their leadership. Apparently, Innovis held an emergency strategy meeting. I didn't need to see the minutes, the industry grapevine delivered them to me like gossip on a silver platter. Their CEO was furious. Revenue projections were plummeting. Key partnerships had evaporated without warning. And every attempt to get a solid answer from anyone in the industry was met with the same vague corporate brush-off. Now's not the right time. We're shifting priorities. We've decided to explore other directions. Every sentence a dagger. Every vagueness a warning. And here's where it gets even more tragic. Elias, good man that he was, tried to fix it. Reports said he stepped up during that meeting with a calm, structured plan. Audit their processes, strengthen their compliance, rebuild trust one relationship at a time. A logical strategy. A responsible one. One that would have worked, if the problem had been internal. But their CEO didn't want logic. He wanted a culprit. And when leaders can't find an external threat, they start hunting inside the walls. I was told he started questioning department heads one by one, trying to sniff out sabotage or incompetence. But when none of those emerged, he landed on the person who had the most influence over operations. Elias. Not directly, not yet. But the tone shifted. You know the signs. Less eye contact. Sharper emails. More urgent check-ins that disguised micromanagement as concern. It wasn't an attack. Not outright. Just a slow tightening of screws around the one man actually trying to save the sinking ship. And watching it unfold from the outside felt like the universe was giving me a front-row seat to a storm I'd unknowingly summoned years earlier. Elias had left my old company because of mistreatment. Now he was on the brink of facing the same pattern again. Not because of his failures, but because of mine. And the truth I finally told. He still had no clue that a single conversation in a quiet executive office miles away had reshaped his entire professional destiny. And the fall? It was only beginning. The next shift in the winds came quietly, the way most corporate disasters do. No loud announcement. No emergency bulletin. Just a subtle tremor that only the people closest to the ground could feel. A recruiter friend of mine sent me a message late one night. Hey, what's going on with Innovis? I've seen 2 of their senior managers quietly put out feelers this week. Now that was telling. People don't abandon ship when it's sinking. They abandon ship right before everyone else realizes it's sinking. From what I gathered, the first to go were the ones closest to the financials. They saw numbers slipping into the red, the kind of drop executives try to hide behind optimistic forecasts and buzzwords like strategic recalibration. But employees? They always feel the truth before the quarterly report confirms it. And while all this was happening, Elias kept pushing himself harder. He was giving presentations. He was rallying teams. He was drafting new proposals, revising strategy decks, meeting partners, calling suppliers. Trying to make the impossible work. Every message I heard about him painted the same picture. A man doing everything, to keep Innovis afloat while the waterline crept higher. He wasn't the problem. He wasn't even part of the problem. He was the one desperately plugging holes while the ship's architect blamed him for the storm. But here's the part that twisted deep in my gut. He still didn't know the storm started with me. One conversation. One truth finally spoken aloud. One confession that changed the trajectory of his entire company without him ever hearing my name. And slowly, the industry began to talk about Inavis in the past tense. Not openly. Not officially. But in the way people say, yeah, shame what happened to them, before anything has even happened yet. The collapse wasn't final. Not yet. But the floorboards were creaking beneath them. And Elias, poor, hard-working, blind-sided Elias, was the only one trying to hold them together with his bare hands. By the time autumn rolled around, Inavis had lost 3 more major contracts, quietly, discreetly, like the industry was embarrassed for them. And still, no one outside of a handful of executives knew the real reason. But inside their headquarters, panic had finally begun to take shape. They launched what they called an internal structural review. Which, in corporate language, means we have no idea what's happening, but someone will be blamed for it. The CEO doubled down on control. He started requiring approval for things he'd never cared about before, supplier agreements, budget adjustments, even godforsaken travel reimbursements. When leaders start micromanaging the small stuff, it means they've lost the big picture entirely. And the employees felt it. People who used to stroll through the office now walked with the stiff shoulders of soldiers marching into battle. But the one who wore it the heaviest? Elias. I heard he stayed late almost every night, sometimes until the cleaning staff started turning off the lights around him. He was auditing workflows, calling old contacts, trying to reignite partnerships that were already dead in the water. He still believed the downturn was a solvable issue. He still thought he could fix it. He still thought he was the reason things were slipping, and not some phantom decision made miles away by a man he hadn't spoken to in years. And the CEO? He began using words like accountability in meetings. The kind of word that sounds noble but is almost always a prelude to scapegoating. Staff whispered among themselves that Elias was being set up. That he was being questioned more harshly than others. That when numbers came in low, the CEO's gaze lingered on him the longest. The irony? Heartbreaking. Because the man trying hardest to save the company was becoming the easiest person to blame for its collapse. And me? Watching from the outside, I felt something I never expected. Not guilt. But a strange, heavy awareness that justice doesn't always wear the face you expect. I hadn't meant to aim the consequences at him. I hadn't even imagined the fallout would reach this far. But the truth has a way of reshaping the world long after the words leave your mouth. The quiet crumble had begun. And none of them, not even the ones desperately trying to hold the walls, realized the foundation had cracked years before. By winter, Inavis wasn't just wobbling, it was listing sideways. Their projections were down. Their morale was down. Their opportunities were gone. And like every failing leader who can't bear to look in the mirror, their CEO finally did what everyone expected. He started hunting for someone to blame. At first, it was subtle. He'd CC Elias on emails that didn't concern him. He'd question why certain clients hadn't renewed, clients Elias had never even managed. He'd ask for reports he already had, then act irritated when Elias didn't present them fast enough. It was the beginning of the ritual sacrifice. Then came the meeting. Oh, that infamous meeting. The one I heard about 3 different ways, with the same story every time. The CEO called the senior team into the boardroom, pacing at the head of the table like a general surveying a battlefield he'd already lost. He threw down a stack of printouts, declining revenue trends, lost partnerships, rising costs. And then he said it. We need a leader in operations who can stabilize this organization. Someone who can inspire confidence in our partners." The room went still. Everyone knew what that meant. Then he looked at Elias. Not directly. Not with anger. With something worse. With the cold calculation of a man discarding his own pawn. "Elias," he said, "perhaps it's time to consider whether your role is still the best fit for your skill set. A corporate execution. Quiet. Efficient. Cruel." I heard Elias didn't react at first, just blinked, stunned. He'd spent months trying to save the company, and now they were preparing to push him off the very cliff he'd been trying to pull them away from. Some managers shifted uncomfortably. One tried to speak up, but the CEO cut her off with a raised hand. "This is not personal. It's what's best for Innovis." Except it was personal. It always had been. Because the company wasn't failing due to Elias's leadership. It was failing because the industry had silently quarantined them. And the CEO couldn't fathom that something external, something invisible, something unnamed was tearing his empire down. He needed a villain. And Elias was standing in the only spotlight available. And I, sitting miles away, in a different office, in a different life, felt the strangest mix of satisfaction and sadness. I hadn't meant for the blast radius to hit him. But truth is messy. Justice is imperfect. And karma doesn't always choose clean targets. Elias had escaped my mistreatment years ago. But now he was facing its echo. The company that rose on the ashes of his old suffering was about to collapse on top of him. The weeks after that boardroom ambush were a slow-motion unraveling. Not of the company, that had already begun. But of Elias himself. He didn't quit. He didn't storm out. He didn't shout or argue or defend himself the way a lesser man might have. No, he did something much more heartbreaking. He worked harder. He came in earlier. Stayed later. Rebuilt entire operational models from scratch. Drafted new outreach strategies. Even tried to salvage accounts that had long since moved on to companies that weren't quietly radioactive. And every time he presented a new plan, the CEO shot holes through it. Questions that weren't questions. Critiques that weren't constructive. Cold, clipped comments meant to remind him he was now standing on a trapdoor. And everyone in the room felt it. People avoided sitting next to him in meetings. Some stopped copying him on emails altogether, as if his name itself was becoming a liability. The company wasn't just failing. It was turning on its own. One afternoon, I heard from a mutual contact that Elias had been seen leaving the office looking broken. Not angry. Not defeated. Just emptied out in a way only corporate betrayal can do. He'd given that company everything. His time, his skill, his reputation. And now they were preparing to make him the final offering to a disaster he didn't create. The CEO scheduled what he called a performance reevaluation meeting. The kind of meeting that doesn't end with reevaluation. The kind that ends with a cardboard box and a severance packet. And here's the part that twisted the knife. Elias still didn't know why everything had fallen apart. He blamed himself for not being enough. For missing something. For failing the company he'd helped build. He didn't know the industry had turned their backs long before he started noticing the cracks. He didn't know they were blacklisted because of a truth he was never meant to hear. He didn't know the dominoes fell because years ago, I'd lied to him. And years later, I finally told the truth about it. He was about to become the final casualty of a war he didn't even know had been fought. And the cruelest part? He would walk into that reevaluation meeting believing he deserved it. The morning of Elias's performance reevaluation felt like the final act of a tragedy everyone could see coming. Everyone except him. Word travels fast in offices, even when whispers stay soft. People knew what the meeting meant. They watched him walk toward that conference room with the same expression you see on soldiers heading toward a battle they didn't volunteer for. He carried a folder under his arm. Color-coded plans, revised projections, risk mitigation proposals he'd spent nights perfecting. He walked in believing he could still fix things. He walked in thinking competence could save him. The CEO was already there when he arrived, sitting at the head of the table like a judge waiting to deliver a sentence he'd written weeks ago. I later heard this from someone who was in the room. Elias greeted everyone politely. The CEO didn't smile back. He started the meeting with a speech dripping in insincerity. How he valued Elias's contributions. How the company was facing unprecedented challenges. How leadership required difficult decisions. Then he started listing failures. Failures that weren't failures at all. Client losses that had nothing to do with Elias. Partnerships that had vanished for reasons he would never be told. Market shifts that were actually the silent ripple of the blacklist he never knew existed. At one point, Elias tried to respond, calmly, respectfully. Suggesting new strategies, explaining the complexities of the drop. But the CEO cut him off. "This isn't a discussion," he said. "This is a transition." Those words. That tone. The kind that tells you the door is already closing behind you. The room went quiet. Then the CEO slid a thin packet across the table. Termination terms. A severance offer insultingly small for someone who'd carried the company through hell. Elias stared at it for a long moment. Not shocked. Just hollow. He didn't argue. Didn't raise his voice. Didn't ask why, even though that question must have been burning a hole in his chest. He simply gathered his folder, nodded once, and said, "I hope the company finds the stability it's looking for." Then he walked out. Quietly, gracefully. The same way he'd walked out of my life years before. Except this time, he was leaving behind an empire crumbling under the weight of consequences that had started long before he ever sat in that conference room. When the door closed behind him, someone in the room reportedly whispered, "He didn't deserve that." And they were right. He didn't deserve what happened then. He didn't deserve what happened years earlier. But karma doesn't ask for permission. Karma doesn't choose clean lines or safe targets. It moves through the world like water. Finding cracks, filling spaces, wearing away foundations until the truth shows. And the truth was about to hit Inavis harder than any firing ever could. After Elias walked out of that conference room, with nothing but his dignity and a thin severance packet, Inavis should have steadied itself. That's what the CEO expected, anyway. Get rid of the problem, and the numbers would magically improve. But that's the thing about blaming the wrong person. The real problem doesn't go away. It gets bigger. And hungrier. Within weeks, cracks turned into fractures. Clients they'd considered stable suddenly shifted their contracts elsewhere. A long-term supplier demanded renegotiations with harsher terms. 2 investors requested a performance inquiry into the company's trajectory, corporate speak for "we think you're lying to us." And with Elias gone, the operational machine began to sputter. Deadlines slipped. Shipments went out incorrectly. The quality that Elias had held together with sheer force of will began to crumble. But the CEO. He still didn't understand. Still thought it was coincidence, unlucky timing, a rough economic cycle. He didn't yet grasp the truth. The industry had turned its back. And he'd fired the only person capable of holding the company together in a storm he couldn't even see. Employees started leaving, quietly, one after another, like tenants evacuating a condemned building. Some left cryptic farewell emails. Others walked out without saying a word. Those who stayed were stretched thin, unclear on leadership, drowning in the chaos. And the more the company slipped, the more desperate the CEO became. He ramped up hiring searches that no qualified candidate wanted. He slashed budgets in departments already operating on fumes. He scheduled 3-hour meetings that solved nothing and blamed everyone. Then came the rumor. Whispered through the industry like a badly kept secret. Innovis was on the brink of insolvency. Their financials weren't stable. Their partnerships were deteriorating. Their credibility, whatever remained of it, was gone. And the man who walked out with a folder under his arm, thinking he was the cause? He'd never been the cause at all. The truth I told years later had rolled downhill like a boulder, and Innovis never stood a chance. But Elias. The man I once treated disgustingly, the man I'd lied to, the man who'd rebuilt himself? His story wasn't over. The company that cast him aside was about to face its final reckoning. Innovis didn't implode overnight. It eroded, slowly, painfully, like a structure everyone thought was stable until one day they realized the foundation had been dust for years. 3 months after Elias's firing, the announcement finally came. Innovis to begin structured dissolution. Not bankruptcy. Not reorganization. A polite, corporate obituary. Vendors pulled out. Investors bailed. Clients severed ties. Employees scattered like birds fleeing a collapsing tower. And the CEO, the architect of his own downfall, was left alone in an office full of empty desks and silent phones, wondering how the hell it had all fallen apart so fast. But the industry knew. The Whisper Network knew. I knew. And somewhere out there, Elias probably saw the headline. Maybe sitting at home. Maybe already interviewing somewhere new. Maybe sipping a cup of coffee with that quiet resilience he always carried. He must have wondered what happened. Why everything collapsed so completely after he left. Why a company that once treated him like the problem couldn't survive without him. But he would never trace it back to me. Never know that the same man who lied to him years ago was the one who finally told the truth that toppled an empire. Not out of revenge. Not out of spite. But because when my director asked if we should partner with Innovis, I could have lied again. Could have said nothing. Could have let the past stay buried. But I didn't. I told the truth. And that truth slid into the industry like a blade, quiet, clean, untraceable. Elias didn't get his revenge. He didn't even know revenge was happening. But he walked away with his integrity, his reputation, and a new beginning. While Innovis, the company that tried to scapegoat him, the company that rose on the bones of mistreated employees, was reduced to exactly what it deserved to be. A cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms and coffee breaks. A reminder that karma doesn't forget the names you think it will. And me? I learned that sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it doesn't blaze or strike or scream. Sometimes justice is just the quiet moment. When the truth finally catches up. And when it does, it takes the whole damn house with it.